What do you do when your own family looks at you and still doesn't see you? Not who you've become, not what you've sacrificed, just who you used to be, or worse, who they assumed you were. I'm Kendall Reeve. I'm 36 years old. I've spent the last 12 years embedded in special operations running tactical intelligence for high-clearance missions across multiple continents. My team moves in silence. We analyze, redirect, and neutralize threats before they hit front-page news. I've briefed NATO officers, helped reroute active drone paths, and identified signals that saved squadrons from vanishing mid-air. But none of that mattered the night my own sister laughed in my face and said my job was cute. It was supposed to be a celebration. My parents, or technically my mother and stepfather, were marking their 40th wedding anniversary. Heather, my sister, planned everything like a royal event. She's a high-end interior designer now, the kind whose life gets published in luxury lifestyle spreads. She turns mundane rooms into dreamy backdrops for rich clients who want their homes to feel curated. She did the same for this party. Chandeliers imported from Paris, candles that cost more than my boots, caterers in black vests who barely made eye contact unless you held a wine glass with confidence. I hesitated even as I stood outside her house, gripping a decent bottle of Cabernet and staring at my reflection in the tinted window of my rental. Pressed blouse, charcoal slacks, my military ID clipped neatly to my belt. Not glamorous, not soft, but me. I wasn't there to impress. I was there because Richard, my stepdad, had asked. He's always been decent even when quiet. He'd called me a week before and said it would mean a lot to your mother if you came. That usually meant she'll be furious if you don't. I almost declined. But Naomi, my teammate and closest friend on base, said something that made me pause. Maybe they still don't deserve you, Kendall, but maybe you deserve to show up anyway, for yourself. She was right. I'd built a life of impact. I didn't need their approval. But maybe I needed to stand in that house just once and not feel like the afterthought. Heather's house sat like a throne atop a hill in Northern California, the kind of place that made realtors drool and normal people feel underdressed. White stone facade, curved driveway, uplighting in the hedges. I parked between a silver Tesla and a black Range Rover and exhaled once, before buzzing the gate. The door opened as if she'd been waiting to time it perfectly. "Kendall," she said with that practiced smile, "you made it." Her eyes flicked down my outfit, still keeping it utilitarian, I see. We went with a winter elegance theme. "Hope you're not too warm." The tone was sugar-coated poison. A gentle jab, not quite rude, not quite kind, the type of thing Heather had mastered since we were kids. I handed her the wine, Cabernet. Thought it might go well with duck or anything heavy. She took it like it was a gift bag from a gas station and handed it off to a server. "Come in. Everyone's here. Mom and Richard are already 2 glasses in. Brian's somewhere being charming. Brian, her husband, worked in real estate development and had that slick, too-tan confidence of someone who thought charm was currency. As I stepped into the house, I caught my reflection in a hallway mirror, and for a second, I questioned myself. The guests sparkled. Sequins, tailored suits, high-end perfume. The house smelled like fig and cedar and some kind of imported flower I couldn't name. And me, I was the military silhouette with a tight bun and unpainted nails. I recognized a few faces, mostly from holiday photos I'd received via group email. Cousins, aunts, old neighbors. Heather's yoga instructor, probably. They clustered in curated groups, each one a little showroom of affluence and filtered smiles. Mom glanced at me over her wine glass. "Oh, Kendall, you look rested." That was her favorite coded insult. Last time it was, "You look strong," which meant I'd gained weight. This time rested probably meant I hadn't bothered with contouring. Richard gave me a warm nod from across the room. He looked older, smaller, like his decades of playing peacemaker had chipped at the edges. I moved through the house like a ghost, visible but unacknowledged. At one point, I passed a table where someone was laughing loudly about a celebrity sighting at a vineyard, and I wondered how it was possible to feel so alien around people who shared my DNA. Dinner was called like a Broadway production. One of the servers announced it with a gentle bell and a velvet voice. The dining room had a long table with name cards that revealed more about our family dynamic than any conversation ever had. Heather and Brian at the head, Mom and Richard beside them, Emma, Heather's daughter, directly across from Heather, of course. Landon's card was near the middle, mine between Uncle Ron, who once asked me if women in the Army had to carry tampons in their vests, and Cousin Elise, who believed fonts had vibrational frequencies. I sank into my chair and folded my napkin slowly. This wasn't dinner. This was performance art. And I was the extra who didn't know her cue. The food was plated like art. Duck confit with blood orange reduction, hand-carved vegetables in symmetrical patterns. But I barely touched mine. Not because I wasn't hungry, because I knew what was coming. Heather clinked her glass to command attention. Brian's resort project just broke ground on Phase 2, she said proudly, and Emma just got early admission to Columbia. Full ride applause, toasts. Mom dabbed a tear and said she always knew Emma was the special one. Then Heather, with the performance timing of someone used to stealing scenes, smiled sweetly and said, "But tonight isn't just about us, it's about family, and we're so lucky Kendall could make it." Every head turned to me. My fork hovered mid-air, still doing what exactly Kendall Heather continued. Military admin, I didn't blink. Tactical intelligence, I said calm and clipped. I manage field strategy for special ops teams overseas. She tilted her head. So, like spreadsheets. A ripple of laughter. Someone quipped, "Guess you're the reason the Pentagon keeps asking for more funding." I set my fork down. Last month, one of my predictions prevented an ambush in Syria. We avoided casualties. That wasn't a spreadsheet. That was a decision tree based on live intel fed through multiple global networks. Silence. Cousin Elise tried to recover. Wow, that's something. Heather turned to Emma. "Anyway, we're thinking of Tuscany this summer. You'll love it. Villas, wine, hot air balloons." That did it. "Must be nice," I said, not looking up. "Some of us don't get summers off." Heather's eyes narrowed instantly. "Well, maybe if you'd chosen a career that didn't involve tents and following orders." Mom gasped. Brian laughed. Even Richard looked down at his plate. I pushed my chair back slightly. I don't follow orders. I issue them, and those orders save people's lives. You could have heard the chandelier hum. Uncle Ron cleared his throat like he was rescuing a PR disaster. What Kendall's trying to say is that every job matters, even the behind-the-scenes ones. I turned toward him slowly. "No, I'm not trying to say anything. You just don't know how to listen." The silence held, and then I stood. Not in anger, in precision. The kind I learned in briefing rooms and blackout operations. Calm, still, sharp. "Excuse me," I said, and walked toward the hallway. I gripped the stair rail until my knuckles turned white. The marble under my boots felt too polished, too fake. I wasn't angry. I was exhausted. Exhausted from being the afterthought, the polite joke, the background noise, the woman they couldn't brag about because they didn't understand her. I'd intercepted intelligence that had redirected drone flights mid-air. I'd translated obscure dialects on encrypted transmissions. I'd sat across from foreign agents and walked out with classified data intact. But to my own family, I was just Kenny, the one who never wore heels, the one who didn't fit the photo albums, the one who didn't belong. I almost didn't go back in. But then I remembered Naomi's voice again, soft but grounded. "You don't show up for them, Kendall. You show up to remind yourself of who you are." So I did. I returned to that table like a ghost returning to her own funeral. Not for their approval, for my own reckoning. Heather was mid-story describing how she once made a senator cry over floral arrangements at a gala. Her voice sparkled. The guests were leaning in again. That's when the doorbell rang. The bell echoed like a warning shot through the dining room. Heather froze mid-sentence. The candlelight flickered. "We're not expecting anyone," she said, voice tight. Brian stood reluctantly adjusting his cufflinks as if it were beneath him to answer the door in his own home. The room buzzed softly with curiosity. Then came the voice not from Brian but from the entryway. "Excuse me, is Major Reeve present?" Every glass was lowered. Every head turned. Every breath held. I rose slowly. My legs moved before my brain could catch up. I hadn't told base I was here. I hadn't checked in anywhere. There was no operational need, no pending tasking, no reason. Then he stepped into view. Sharp flight uniform, boots silent on hardwood, jaw set, shoulders squared. It was Landon, Heather's son, my nephew. Now 25 and nothing like the skinny kid I remembered from summers spent in backyard sprinklers and overcooked 4th of July barbecues. Back then, he was curious, quiet, always watching me when no one else did. Now he looked resolute. He stepped into the center of the dining room like it was his airstrip, his stage, and in one clean, practiced motion, he raised his right hand and snapped to attention. Major Kendall Reeve, United States Army Tactical Intelligence Division. Ma'am, I was ordered to deliver a priority update. Apologies for the interruption. Time stopped. Heather's fork hovered mid-air, a bite of duck trembling in place. Mom went pale. Richard straightened in his seat. Brian blinked like someone had pulled the rug out from under him. Someone, maybe, Cousin Elise, mouthed the word Major. I returned the salute without thinking, my hand steady. My heartbeat roared in my ears. Lieutenant Morgan, I replied evenly. I wasn't expecting a field dispatch. Landon lowered his hand and stood at ease, calm as ice. Colonel Harrington requested I deliver briefing materials in person, said it couldn't wait until morning. Heather finally found her voice. Landon? What? What are you doing? You can't just... This is a private dinner. He turned to her respectfully, but with zero apology. I'm on assignment, Mom. Then he turned to the table, voice firm and steady. In case it wasn't clear, Major Reeve was the strategic lead on Operation Kingshield. Her intel saved my squadron last month during a zero-visibility flight out of Eastern Europe. We were 3 seconds from being locked onto by a targeting system. She rerouted us. We're alive because of her. Silence. Real silence. Not awkward, not embarrassed. Just the heavy, stunned stillness that follows a truth too big to ignore. My mother's lips were parted slightly. She didn't speak, couldn't. Heather's face had drained of its usual glow. She looked like someone who had forgotten her lines in the middle of her own show. Brian just blinked, still blinking. No one laughed this time. No one made a joke about spreadsheets. Landon pulled a sealed folder from inside his jacket. This is for you, ma'am, from Colonel Harrington. Full encryption key and site directive inside. I took it silently. We can debrief outside, I said. He nodded once. Of course, ma'am. Sorry for disrupting your dinner. Then he turned on his heel sharp and practiced and walked out. And I followed. The imported rug barely muffled the sound of my boots. Behind me, 35 people sat in stunned, paralyzed silence. I didn't look back. The cold air outside hit different. Not cold like winter, cold like relief. I exhaled as the door shut behind me. No more chandeliers, no more seating charts, no more microaggressions disguised as concern. Landon stood by the fountain hands behind his back in classic military form, but when he looked at me, it wasn't formality anymore. It was pride. Okay, he said, grinning. That was dramatic as hell. I stared at him. You ambushed me. He raised a brow, not apologizing. Naomi told me where you were. Said your family was being themselves again. Figured maybe it was time someone showed them who you actually are. I folded my arms. You called me Major, in front of everyone. That's your rank, isn't it? I searched his face. There was no smugness, no showboating, just calm clarity. You didn't have to do that. He shifted his stance. Yes, I did. That data packet you flagged, the one you labeled Priority Echo, that intel saved us. Our bird was flying blind through fog so thick we couldn't see the wings. Your forecast vector rerouted us through a cold corridor 5 seconds before we would have lit up on thermal. He paused, then said it lower. You didn't file paperwork. You delivered survival. They needed to hear that. He pulled a sealed envelope from his chest pocket. This really is for you, by the way. Colonel Harrington, briefing at 0700, but I may have exaggerated the urgency. I cracked a smile. A real one. The first in days. Well played. He stood tall again, but this time his salute was relaxed warm. You've got more people who respect you than you think, Aunt Kendall. Then he turned and walked into the night, leaving me alone in the quiet. And it wasn't lonely. It was earned. I stood there for a long time, envelope in hand, heartbeat settling. The same house that once made me feel so small was now behind me. The same people who once pitied my life were now speechless. And I wasn't angry. I wasn't craving validation. I wasn't waiting for an apology. What I felt was stillness. The kind of stillness that follows truth. Landon didn't come for revenge. He didn't storm in to humiliate anyone. He came to recalibrate the room, to shift the power by speaking it plainly. And he did. I had spent years waiting to be acknowledged, years wondering if I needed to explain myself better, if maybe I was the one who failed to connect. But standing there in my uniform holding classified documents from a colonel who trusted me with mission-critical data, I realized something I didn't need them to understand. Not anymore. By the time I arrived back at base the next morning, the sun had barely cleared the ridgeline. The desert air was sharp clean, the kind of air that didn't lie to you. I walked into the ops center and straight into Colonel Harrington's briefing. Cross-border chatter near the Turkish line, he said. Something's heating up. Reeve, I want your eyes on the Syrian corridor. Map it for choke points. If they're moving, we need to know where they'll land. I didn't hesitate. I sat down, pulled up the surveillance grid, started connecting signals like a composer writing music, no applause, no clinking glasses, just the steady rhythm of a keyboard, just the life I'd built one clear decision at a time. Later that afternoon, Naomi handed me coffee without a word. I raised an eyebrow. You told him. She smirked. He reached out last week, said he was tired of being told about you, figured it was time he saw the real thing. I shook my head. He didn't have to go that far. Naomi didn't miss a beat. You deserved that moment, Kendall. He just gave the room permission to see it. I nodded, not in agreement, in recognition. 3 days later, base security buzzed my line. Civilian requesting entry. Name Heather Morgan. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. She'd never visited the base, never asked about where I worked, never even pretended to be curious. But now she was... Here I took a long breath. Escort her to conference room B. Clear her for non-classified access. 10-minute window. I didn't know her time. But something in me, not forgiveness, just curiosity, wanted to know what she thought she was doing here. She walked in wearing a tailored coat and low heels, but no makeup. Her hair pulled back, no earrings, no gloss. For the first time in my life, Heather looked uncurated, like a version of herself I'd never been introduced to. She sat down slowly, folding her hands with the stiffness of someone not used to being uncertain. For a few seconds, she said nothing. Then I'm sorry, she whispered. I blinked. For all of it. For the comments. The way I made you feel. For acting like your life wasn't real because I couldn't understand it. She didn't say it like a speech. There was no PR polish, no agenda, just truth. She kept going. When Landon walked in that night, I didn't recognize him at first, but when he saluted you, something just shifted. Not just in the room, in me. I stayed quiet, let her keep going. She needed to, and I needed to see if she could. I didn't respond to your emails because I didn't know what to say. I assumed you'd chosen some detached, solitary path. I didn't realize it was one built from strength, not absence. I thought you were the one avoiding the family, but I think maybe we avoided you. She paused, eyes slightly red. I don't expect us to become best friends. I don't even expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know I see it now. She looked at me directly. For the first time in years, not with judgment, not even guilt, just honesty. I studied her face for a long moment. She looked smaller, not weaker, just realer, like someone stripped of performance. You don't have to get it, I said, finally my voice even, but you have to stop reducing it. She nodded, slowly. Not defensively. I'll try. That was all. She stood, paused, then turned to leave. She didn't hug me, didn't overcompensate, just walked away quietly, humanly, and it was enough. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel the need to rub anything in. I just felt done. Done needing her to understand. Done waiting for the room to recognize me. Done asking to be seen by people who hadn't earned the right. Later that week, I found a small package in my inbox. It wasn't from Heather, it was from Landon. Inside was a framed photo, me and him sitting at the base cafeteria, still in uniform, still grinning. On the back, he'd scribbled, "Thanks for showing me what leadership really looks like. Latian Morgan." I stared at it for a long time, not for validation, not for pride, but because in that photo, in that moment, I realized something no dinner table had ever taught me. Leadership isn't about being centered in the spotlight. It's about holding your ground in the dark until the world adjusts. I placed Landon's framed photo beside another one I've kept for years. It was from a mission in Jordan. Naomi and I, dusty, squinting against the desert glare, our hair tied back tight, a half-eaten protein bar on the table between us. Both of us laughing at something no one else would understand. Those two photos side by side told a story my family never asked to hear, but I didn't need them to. One showed who saw me when I was young, the other who saw me when I no longer needed to be seen. Neither required applause, neither needed explanation. They were just true. And sometimes, truth is enough. There's this myth people like Heather believe that if you're not talked about, you're not worth talking to. That if your life doesn't fit neatly into brunch anecdotes or Instagram captions, it must be lonely. But the thing is, I was never alone. I had purpose. I had command. I had people who'd trust me with their lives in pitch black skies over hostile terrain. And most importantly, I trusted myself. The girl they dismissed at 13 for being too quiet. The woman they brushed off for wearing uniforms instead of heels. The sister they once called almost, or maybe someday she's gone. In her place is a leader, not just by rank, by clarity. I don't need to explain my path anymore. It doesn't have to look like theirs. It was never supposed to. The dinner didn't rewrite history. Heather didn't suddenly become the sister I needed at 19. Mom didn't apologize for Thanksgiving. Brian didn't look me in the eye when I passed him at the party. And that's okay. They're still themselves, still polished, curated, market-ready. But I changed. Because for the first time, I didn't need them to change. I didn't crave recognition. I didn't shrink when the spotlight passed me by. I stood up. I took up space. And I walked out, not smaller, but solid. You don't owe anyone your visibility. You don't have to perform your worth. Some of us were never meant to fit at their table. Some of us were meant to build a new one. So if you've ever been the invisible one, the quiet one, the one whose stories were never quite loud enough for the dinner conversation, let me say this: you are not a shadow. You are the structure. You are the reason the room holds shape. They just weren't facing you. Have you ever been the overlooked one in your own family? The one who built a life in silence only to return and be met with polite dismissal? Drop your story in the comments. I want to hear it, because this channel is for us. For the underestimated, the uncelebrated, the ones who rise without permission. If this story hit home like the video, subscribe for more real, raw, and resilient stories. Because here you don't have to explain